In the beginning, God created the universe, and within it, a planet called Earth. God's Spirit hovered over the dark and empty surface, speaking life into it. Light appeared. Sky and land split from the oceans. Trees and plants grew. Days and nights began, and all kinds of creatures filled the earth. Humans were formed in God's image to continue God's work. Things were really good. But soon, humans decided we want to live our way, not God's. In their struggle for control, selfishness and violence filled the world. So God started over with just Noah and his family. A few generations later, God made this covenant to a man named Abraham. The land around you, as far as you can see, is now yours. Your family will be as many as the stars and will be my blessing to the entire world. Years passed. Then miraculously, in their old age, Abraham and his wife had their only son, Isaac, just as God promised decades earlier. Later, Isaac had twins, Jacob and Esau. Then Jacob had 12 sons. The youngest, Joseph, moved the family to Egypt, saving them from a famine. There, they grew into a large nation, a people called to be different, to remind everyone what it looks like to live in God's ways. Abraham's descendants, now called the people of Israel, were moved to Egypt by Joseph to save them from a famine. There they grew into a large nation. The Egyptians welcomed them at first, but soon this turned into fear and jealousy. The Israelites were forced to be slaves and do hard labor. But God heard their cries of pain. Through a humble leader named Moses and incredible signs and wonders, God led the Israelites in a great exodus back toward their promised land. As the Israelites journeyed through the desert, God guided them with a pillar of fire at night and a cloud by day. The Israelites complained about being hungry and abandoned. So God sent birds and sweet, flaky manna for them to eat, and made fresh water pour from a rock. God even lived in the middle of their camp in a sacred tent called a tabernacle. Along their journey, God gave them special instructions called laws and commands, guiding the Israelites to live differently, to show others how to follow God's ways. But the people complained. We don't want to live by these rules like slaves again. Living their own ways, the Israelites wandered the desert for 40 years.
Good morning, church. It's so great to see you. There is nothing quite like a vacation, wouldn't you agree? Maybe it's to the Grand Canyon, or maybe it's to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, or maybe the beaches of Destin, Florida, or even right now a fall foliage trip to the Northeast. There's nothing quite like a vacation. And getting to the end destination is awesome, but sometimes the road trip to that destination can be pretty challenging, right? I mean, I have to admit and to confess a shameful chuckle when I watched in 1983 National Lampoon's Vacation, where Clark Griswold's grandmother passes away on the road trip. They don't know what to do with her, so they strap her to the top of their wood-paneled station wagon. Here's a picture of it right here, and I have to tell you that I know that I chuckled when I saw it. There it is right there. And now that I'm a grandparent, I don't think it's funny at all, to be completely honest with you. You know, one of the most aggravating things about a road trip, without question, is the children misbehaving in the back seat of the car. When our family went on a road trip when I was a kid, it was a wood-paneled station wagon, and there were 6 of us, mom and dad, and 4 kids, so we were pretty tight in the back seat of the car and not too far into the trip. We were into each other's space. We were touching each other. We were arguing and complaining. And about a half hour into the trip, we were basically shouting out the obvious question, and it is, are we there yet? And my mom and dad initially would start off by reaching behind and slapping us on the leg and get it together and quiet down. But almost always on every single trip, at some point of the trip, my dad blew a gasket. And he said, you kids, if you don't stop this, I'm going to turn the car around and we're going to go back home. He needed to do it at least once for us to believe that he would actually do that. So we called his bluff. Yeah. So it's one thing to have the kids misbehaving in the back. It's another thing altogether when the driver takes the wrong turn. I remember this happened to Roseanne and I years ago, and yet for me, it was like yesterday. We were on a road trip from San Antonio back to our home then in the Fort Worth, Texas area. It's about a 5-hour road trip, and I started off driving, and it was at night, and I got us on the road, but a couple hours in, I got a little tired, and I asked Roseanne if she wouldn't mind taking over for a bit while I took a bit of a nap, and she said yes. And before I turned the wheel over to her, I told her, now, sweetie, it's not that hard. You just stay on this road. Just stay on this road, and it'll take us all the way to the exit of our home. How hard could that be? About an hour and a half later, she wakes me up and says, are we supposed to be in Houston? And I looked up and there's a sign for Houston. Now, you guys know this. You know me long enough now to know that I am a nice guy, but this just pushed me over the edge like nothing I've ever experienced, and I let her have it, man. And she deserved it. You know, I expressed to her my extreme disappointment, and I'll tell you why, because this took 5 hours of us out of the way, right? And so I said, let me take over the wheel, and I took over the wheel with sort of a haughty attitude, and I grabbed it, and I gave her the silent treatment for about 30 minutes to protect me from saying what I really wanted to say. And we're driving, and we get back to the place where we made the wrong turn, and it turns out I was the one who was driving when we made the wrong turn, right? Oh, I hated that moment. This is a meme that sort of expresses that. Humble pie is free, man. Humble pie is free. Yeah. So we don't have to worry about that much anymore because today we have GPS, Global Positioning Satellite, right? And, you know, my GPS is put in the voice of a lady with an Australian accent. I've named her Olivia. And Olivia sees everything from the beginning into the end. She sees where there's going to be traffic and where there's going to be detours, where there's going to be speed traps. And she tells me to turn to the right and she tells me to turn to the left. And I'm really amazed at just the level of patience and just how nice she is overall, you know. For example, if she says to me, turn left, and I have a hunch that turning right would be better, she doesn't say, I said turn left, you idiot. She just says, no problem, recalculating. Well, today we've come to chapter 6 of the story, and we're going to find the children of Israel are on a road trip of sorts, and if we put the chronological map up on the board here, we see that we are now at the character of Moses, and that's where we've been, and this will be our third and final week. It's 1526 BC, and Moses is driving, and the children of Israel are in the back seat. Now, this story is found in the 4th book of the Bible. Say it with me, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. So you're going to find it in Numbers. And you also told it retold in the book of Deuteronomy, the next book, because Deuteronomy means the second telling of the story. Moses is driving, the children of Israel in the back seat. Their end destination is the land of Canaan, the land that God had promised to give to Israel 650 years earlier with the character of Abraham, who we have studied, who is the very founder of this brand new nation. Now, they are driving, their road trip has them driving across the Sinai desert on their way to Canaan, which is known as a land filled with milk and honey. And I suppose it would be like driving across central and West Kansas on your way to like the Rocky Mountains, something sort of like that, if you don't mind me saying that. I've never done it, but I've heard tell that it would be pretty similar of an experience. And so they're driving across, and in the back seat are the children of Israel, and there's not just 4 of them, but rather there's an estimated 1 to 3 million of them, right? So what could possibly go wrong, right? Well, we were told that the kids of Israel start acting up in the back seat, and we're given in the story, recorded in Numbers and Deuteronomy, 3 instances where they sort of start complaining and acting up. The first, they're just complaining about their general overall hardships. Listen to this. They tell Moses that they actually want to go back to Egypt. Yeah. How stupid is that? They were in slavery in Egypt. It's one thing to get Israel out of Egypt. It's another thing to get Egypt out of Israel. They wanted to go back to slavery, not because they liked slavery, but because they know how to do slavery well. They were comfortable with the rhythms of slavery, which is true for many of us. We stay in the awful position that we're in because we're comfortable with it. So they wanted to go back to Egypt, right? And then the second instance is that they're complaining about the food that God has provided for them. You know, when you're going across the desert, there's not a lot of food. So God just like rains it down every day for them to eat. It's manna, and they start complaining about it, right? I get that, to be honest with you. You know, when Roseanne and I were first married, we didn't have a lot of money. We were in college. And so every night, Roseanne made the same exact thing, tuna casserole. You know, it's a can of tuna and some noodles, and she sprinkles those, fried onion straws on top of it and heats it up. You know, at first it tasted really good, but after the 200th evening of tuna casserole, I finally said, that's it. No more tuna casserole. And we didn't have it for another 20 years, I swear to you. We never had it for another 20 years. So I get their complaining. The third instance recorded in the story involves a guy named Aaron and Miriam. It's the brother and sister of Moses, and they're in the backseat like backseat drivers, and they're complaining, why does Moses get to drive all the time? They're complaining that God only speaks to Moses. Well, in all 3 of these instances, the story tells us that God pulls the car over and he disciplines them. But these 3 are not the only 3. In Numbers chapter 14, we are told that there were 10 such incidences of juvenile behavior coming from the Israelites. Miserable. But it's one thing for the kids in the back to be complaining and making the trip aggravating. It's another thing altogether when the driver makes the wrong turn. And that's exactly what happens, recorded in Numbers chapter 13. The Lord said to Moses, send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders. So these 12 leaders, who are the drivers for their family, are commissioned to go into the land of Canaan to spy it out, to check it out, and to bring back a report. Now keep in mind, there hasn't been an Israelite who has seen the land of Canaan for over 400 years. And so the men go into Canaan, and they're there for 40 days, and they bring back the report. They say, oh my goodness, the land is absolutely amazing. It's just like we were told, a land flowing with milk and honey. There's only one problem. The people are giants, and there's a lot of them. And if we go in to take their land, they're going to beat us up bad, man. We can't go. Of the 12, only one, Caleb, silenced the audience before Moses, and he said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. Of the remaining 11 men, only Joshua stood with Caleb. The other 10 men said, no way. But Joshua and Caleb said, Yahweh! That's the point. We can't do it, but God is going to do it for us. It was just 2 weeks ago, friends, that he parted the Red Sea for us. Don't you remember that? We can do this. So Moses is so frustrated that he tears his clothes in front of them and he gathers them together to try to plead with them to change their mind. He said, if the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and he will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid. Question, how did they respond to this inspiring speech? the next verse tells us, but the whole assembly talked about stoning them. Right. So I want you to take a look at the map. So we have the children of Israel. They're in Egypt, and they leave Egypt, and they cross over the Red Sea by the mighty hand of God, and then they move down south in the Sinai Peninsula to a place called Mount Sinai, where God gives Moses the 10 Commandments, which we talked about last week, and then they make their way up north to a place called Kadesh Barnea, okay? It is in Kadesh Barnea. Say Kadesh Barnea. It is in Kadesh Barnea that they make the wrong turn, just like Roseanne did. Or I did. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. God was guiding them through his divine GPS system, God's positioning satellite. He could see the beginning to the end, and he tells them to take a left and go north, but they have a hunch that that's not a good idea. So God says, okay, no worries. Recalculating. And God is going to cause them to take a hard right and to head down south deep into the wilderness. And this is what God says to them. As surely as I live, declares the Lord, I will do to you the very thing I heard you say. In this wilderness, your bodies will fall, every one of you 20 years old or more, who was counted in the census and who has grumbled against me. Not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hand to make your home, except Caleb and Joshua. I will bring them in to enjoy the land you have rejected. But as for you, your bodies will fall in this wilderness. Your children will be shepherds here for 40 years, suffering for your unfaithfulness until the last of your bodies lies in the wilderness. For 40 years, one for each of the 40 days you explored the land, you will suffer for your sins and know what it is like to have me against you. Can you imagine God saying that to you? Talk about holy terror. There was a Christian song that came out in the mid-'70s called Walking Sinai. I want you to imagine it's sung in a traditional Baptist church with a quartet. Take another walk around Mount Sinai till you learn your lesson, till you stop your whining and quit your rebelling, till you learn to stand in the day of your testing by trusting and obeying the Lord. Everybody. By trusting and obeying the Lord. One more time. By trusting and obeying the Lord. Yeah, there you go. I tried to sing like I was in a quartet in the Baptist church. There you go. A 40-year detour. Listen to this. It would only have taken them 11 days to get into the land. Now it's going to take them 40 years. And you know what really captured my attention is that their decision, they drug their kids into it. Instead of their kids entering to the land that God promised to give them, where they had their home in a fenced-in backyard, and they were getting their camel's license at the age of 16, and they were looking forward to being a part of the graduating class of Jerusalem High 25. That's 1425 BC, by the way. Instead, they were drugged back into the wilderness where they would be shepherds for the next 40 years because of the unfaithfulness of their parents. So fast forward 40 years. They're back in the same exact spot again, save those 20 years and older who have died in the wilderness. We have a new generation, and Moses gathers them together. Now, Moses is 120 years old, and he's tired. And he's told by God that he's not going to be allowed to actually enter into the land of Canaan after all these years, because he had an act of pride in front of God, in front of the people, by striking the rock when he was told not to. But God did offer him grace. He put him right there east of Canaan, a place called Mount Nebo. And he said, I want you to climb up to Mount Nebo, and I want you to take a look at the land of Canaan. I want you to see it with your very own eyes. And the scripture tells us that God gave him the strength at 120 to climb Mount Nebo, and he protected his eyesight at the age of 120. So with 20/20 vision, he could see the land that God was going to give him. And it would be there that he would die and never walk in the land himself. But before he goes up to Nebo, he gathers the next generation together, and he has a speech for them. Now remember, when we first met Moses, he said to God, don't send me, pardon me, sir, please send someone else. I can't speak. Well, 40 years later, he's had a lot of practice, and some call his grand valedictorian speech. Here's what he says to them. Now, what I'm commanding you today is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. It is not up in the heavens so that you have to ask, who will descend into heaven to get it and proclaim it to us so we may obey it? Nor is it beyond the sea so that you have to ask, who will cross the sea to get it and proclaim it to us so we may obey it? No, the word is very near you. It is in your mouth. It is in your heart so that you may obey it. See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, and to keep his commandments, decrees, and laws. Then you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you are not obedient, and if you are drawn away to bow down to other gods and worship them, I declare to you this day that you will certainly be destroyed. You will not live long in the land you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. This day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and cursings. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him. For the Lord is your life, and he will give you many years in the land he swore to give your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Choose life this time. Don't be like your parents. Remember, your children are in the back seat. Remember how that felt? Be courageous. Choose life. Turn left and go north this time in the name of the Lord. So I want to spend a moment turning our attention away from Moses and the children of Israel and putting it on us to look at our own lives and our own decisions. Because for us, life is like a road trip, isn't it? And God in the upper story is wanting to guide us from his God positioning satellite. He knows the beginning from the end, and he wants the best for us. He does. He wants us to make it to the end destination, which is also in the Bible called the Promised Land. Eternity is called the Promised Land, and the very heart of this Promised Land is that garden he so desperately wants us to get us back to, that we lost at the very beginning of the story. But in order to get there, we have to trust him. So church, if he tells you to make a left turn, what are you going to do? Turn? If he tells you to go right, what are you going to do? Turn? If he tells you to stop, what are you going to do? If he tells you to go faster, what are you going to do? Put the pedal to the metal. If he tells you to bust through the barrier, know how bad and big it looks, what are you going to do? Bust through the barrier, like a scene out of Starsky and Hutch. Yeah, Google that, kids. It was a great show. Right. So some of you today, you are in your Kadesh Barnea, and you are faced with a decision today. I want to remind you that the decision you make will not only affect you, but it will affect everybody in the car with you, particularly your children. It is here in Numbers chapter 14 that we actually see this principle that you may have heard of before, that our bad decisions that lack faith have the capacity of affecting our children to the third and fourth generation. Yeah, take it seriously. It's not just about you. But we also learn in Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse 9 that our good decisions, where we are trusting God, has the capacity to bless our children to 1,000 generations. Choose life. Some of you are facing in Kadesh Barnea the same thing that the Israelites faced. It's fear. And fear is keeping you from making the right decision. And God today is asking you by faith to choose courage. But if you don't, it's okay. We'll just recalculate and send you on a hard right down south into the wilderness of fear. Some of you are dealing with anger, and something's bothering you on the inside. You do pretty good for the hour you're at church, but word gets back to me, man. Something's going on in your soul. You got to get taken care of. But you can't help yourself, and you're faced with your Kadesh Barnea, and God is coming to you by faith and asking you to choose peace. Peace with God, peace with others, peace with yourself. Yeah. But if you don't, it's okay. We'll just recalculate. Send you right deep into the wilderness of anger. I was on a plane this week from Kansas City to New York City, and I like to sit in Southwest Airlines. I like to sit in first class, which is bulkhead, and I like to typically sit, when you go onto the plane, to the left because I'm left-handed, aisle seat. But there was a father and a mother and a baby, and I've raised 4 kids. I don't want to sit next to a baby. And so the other bulkhead, there was a guy sitting in the window seat, and he was hunched over, and he had both hands across the armrest, and I could just feel coming out of his body anger. And I thought, man, I don't really want to sit here, but I don't want to go back any further. So, well, there's a seat between us. So I sat down. And then, sure enough, a younger man comes and sits between us, but because he's got both arms over the rest, which is totally inappropriate. Don't any West Sider ever do that. Like, dude, come on, be appropriate for crying out loud, right? And so this guy's having to go like this, and so I'm having to go like this. I'm like, this is going to be a long flight, but it's going to be over with soon enough. And about 2/3 of the way into the flight, the guy in the middle gets up to go to the restroom, and he comes back, and he has to kind of weasel his way in because this guy's like this. And he's wiggling around and moving around, and finally the guy in the seat, window seat, goes ballistic. And he lays out 5 F-bombs, and he's screaming about this guy. And this guy engages him a little bit, which he shouldn't have done probably, but the flight attendant comes, and I'm scared, man. The flight attendant comes, and she quickly assesses the situation and tells the man in the middle, we're going to give you a voucher. Can I move you to the back of the airplane? And he leaves, and now it's just me and this guy. I'm like, look ahead, Randy, look ahead. There's not much time. Look ahead, look ahead, look ahead. But then I did remember that I achieved an orange belt in Taekwondo in 7th grade. So there was that in case things got out of control, but I just stayed put. So the plane lands, and I'm one of the first out. And as soon as I leave, the flight attendant comes behind me, and right there in the breezeway are 4 police officers. This guy got arrested. He was at Kadesh Barnea, and God was inviting him to bring peace to the table, and he said no. And so we recalculated. We took a hard right down deep into the wilderness of anger. For some of you, it might be addiction. It hasn't gotten you yet, but you're right on the edge. You're right on the edge, and God is asking you by faith to choose self-control, which is kind of a crazy word because you actually can't get self-control by yourself. You have to do it with God and others, like getting involved in one of our care groups that can help you deal with this. But if you don't, that's okay. We'll just recalculate. Take a hard right, send you down south into the wilderness of addiction. For some of you, you're too busy. And not only are you too busy, but you've drug your kids into your busyness. And God is asking you to choose faith and to slow down a little bit. I've been a pastor for 35 years. I've got maybe 3 families in 35 years, young families, to slow down. You just won't do it. That's okay. You don't do it, that's okay. We're just going to have you take a hard right and take a jog down deep south into the wilderness of burnout. The wilderness of burnout. Been there, done that as a young man with my kids. Don't want to go there again. But it's okay if you do. For some of you, it's pride. Maybe you got something to prove to somebody. You got something going on, and you're just a prideful person, and God is coming to you right now at your Kadesh Barnea, and he's asking you by faith to choose to clothe yourself with humility. But if you don't, that's okay. We'll just have you take a hard right and go deep south into the wilderness of pride. I'm going to tell you something truthfully. This has been the most helpful thing for me to learn over the last 10 years, to clothe myself with humility. The person who went ballistic on Roseanne back on that road trip, that guy is gone. He won't do it today because this is a better way to live. It's a better way to live. Finally, for some of you, it's unbelief. God's been pursuing you. He's been after you. He's been showing himself up. He's wanting to redeem you. He's wanting to restore you, but you keep holding out. But right now at Kadesh Barnea, he's asking you by faith to believe in him. But if not, that's okay. We'll just recalculate and have you take a hard right and go deep south into the wilderness of unbelief, which, by the way, lasts a lot longer than 40 years. It's eternity. Some of you have already made the wrong decision, and right now in this moment you are in the wilderness and you're tired and you want to come home. I have good news for you. In the book of Numbers, we are told that if you simply tell God you want to come home, that one, he will forgive you, like the prodigal son or the prodigal daughter. And number two, he may not pull you out of the wilderness right away, but he will come meet you in the wilderness. And when the time is right, he will walk you out of the wilderness. But in the meantime, he will be your home until he brings you back home. Folks, this is the best way to live. Choose life. And all of God's people said, Father, now we come to you and we lift up our hands to you and we invite you as we shout out, we want to come home. We want to have the faith to choose you. We want to be brought back to life. Receive our frail worship today from our hearts in the name of Jesus. Amen.